Hello guys. Tonight's story isn't about buried treasure or sea battles. It's about something smaller, hotter, greasier. This is a story of smoke and lard, of salt meat and rotting biscuits, of creaking wooden beams over your head and a fire barely controlled beneath your feet, of a man who woke before the rest of the crew and went to sleep last, if he was lucky. The man who cooked for pirates. Because long before the cannon roared, before the sails caught wind and the deck pitched with musket fire, someone had to boil the beans. So if your eyes are heavy and the sea cools soft and slow, stay with me, turn down the lights, listen to the waves, and follow the scent of fried salt pork down into the pirate ship's kitchen. Imagine yourself waking up not in a bedroom, but in a box. It's cramped, the ceiling is low, the walls sweat, the floor is sticky with years of spilled grog and brine. It rocks under your feet, not gently, not like a cradle, but with a lurch that sends your whole body into the wall. This is the galley, the kitchen of a pirate ship. Forget gleaming stoves and cutting boards. You cook on an iron pan, nailed down so it doesn't slide when the ship heaves. The fire beneath it sits inside a metal box, called a camboose, bolted to the floor to keep it from tipping. There's no chimney, just a thin hole to let the smoke out. Some of it, at least. The rest clings to the walls, to your hair, to your breath. There's water on the floor, always. Salt water leaks in between the boards. Rain seeps through the deck above. The kitchen lives low in the ship's belly, close to the cargo, and close to the bilge. If you bend too low, you might touch mold. If you reach too high, you'll scrape the ceiling with your knuckles. And the tools? What tools? A blunt knife, rusting in spots. A ladle with a crack through the handle. A pot that still carries the ghost of the last 100 meals, and not in a good way. You have no fridge, no clean plates, and no running water. Your pantry, wooden barrels of salted meat, hard biscuits, dried beans. Everything else, if you're lucky, is crawling. If not with worms, then at least with weevils. The cook, that's you tonight, is awake before the others. The fire has to be coaxed alive in the dark. If the wind is strong, the smoke chokes you. If the sea is rough, it sloshes boiling water across the planks. But you press on, because hungry men grow restless. And restless men, especially pirates, get dangerous. You stir the pot and try not to think about it. You lift the lid of the pot, not because you want to, but because the crew expects it. Inside, a stew of sorts, beans mostly, a few leathery chunks of pork, grey with salt and age. The meat's been preserved for months, maybe longer. It's tough, fibrous, and slick with fat. You scrape off the green film. It'll melt into the broth, and the men will never know. The beans are your saving grace, filling, easy to boil, and hard to spoil. But even they carry a cost. Stored in sacks for weeks at sea, they absorb moisture and mold if not watched. Sometimes they sprout, sometimes they stink. You rinse them in rum, if there's any to spare, and pray the heat does the rest. Flour, that's a dream. If you have it, it's coarse, damp, and crawling. You sift it through cloth, watching the dark specks wiggle and fall away. If the crew notices, they don't complain. Or if they do, they wait until your back is turned. Because complaining to the cook is a dangerous thing. You control the food. And on a ship, that means more than you'd think. You decide who gets the crusty end of the biscuit, and who gets the middle. You can season or not. You can portion. You can withhold. Of course, so can the crew, with their tempers, their fists, their knives. One wrong meal, and they'll blame you for the storm, the scurvy, the rats, and the boredom. You are the closest thing they have to comfort, and when it's taken, the rage turns toward you. They'll mutter, they'll sneer, they'll joke about what goes into your stew. Too many bones, not enough meat. They'll ask if the rats have names. They'll ask if you season with seawater and despair. And you'll laugh softly, because they mean it. They're always hungry, and hunger is a sharp, aching thing. The captain eats first, the quartermaster next. The cook, sometimes last, sometimes not at all. You taste as you stir. That's your portion. As for the rest, they crowd the mess deck when the bell rings. Wooden bowls cracked, pewter spoons dented. Fingers, mostly. No napkins, no table. They sit cross-legged or squat, eating with one hand and holding balance with the other. And when the sea lurches, and the pot spills, and the fire goes out, you start again, because no one forgives a cold supper. It's midnight, or near enough. The sea is calm, for now. You hear it breathing through the timbers, soft creaks, gentle groans. The galley is quiet, damp, dark. You're alone. Almost. In the corner, a rat watches you, fat and slick, eyes like black beads. It twitches its nose, then vanishes behind a sack of meal. You don't bother chasing it. There are always more. You turn back to the fire. It's weak, just embers. You blow on them gently. A little flame curls up. It dances, uncertain. You feed it wood scraps, damp but usable. Smoke curls around your ankles. The smell is everywhere. Salt, grease, ash. Your clothes are soaked with it. Your hands are raw from scrubbing pots with sand and seawater. You reach for the biscuit barrel, lift the lid. There they are, hard as stone, dry as bone, but not alone. The weevils are awake. Tiny beetles, pale and wriggling. They burrow through the bread like it's soft earth. You tap the biscuit on the table. They fall out. Most of them. The rest will go unnoticed or not mentioned. No one dares to waste food. You prepare the morning meal. Something warm. Something simple. Gruel, maybe. A little pork fat, melted in. If there's a clove of garlic, you crush it. Not for taste, for memory. A reminder of land, of kitchens that don't move. Above, footsteps, heavy boots, laughter, curses. The crew is waking. You ladle the gruel into a pot, tie a cloth over the top, wrap the handles in rags so you don't burn your fingers when the ship tilts. You steady your feet, carry it up. The mess deck is noisy. The men are loud, hungry. One sneezes, another spits. A third scratches at his shirt. Lice again. You keep your head down. You serve. One scoop at a time. Each man waits his turn. Some grumble, some leer. One thanks you, quietly. You nod. The deck pitches. A bowl tips. Gruel spills. The man shouts, swears, throws the bowl at the wall. It doesn't break. Nothing on this ship does, except men. You say nothing. Clean it up. You go back to the galley. The pot is empty. You wash it out. Start again. Later in the day, the light shifts. It seeps through the cracks above, soft, grey, tired. You sit for a moment, on a crate, back against the wall, legs stretched out. You close your eyes, just for a second. A spoon clatters nearby, a rat maybe, or just the ship shifting. Doesn't matter. You don't flinch anymore. You dream sometimes of still floors, a clean table, a knife that cuts, fresh bread, cold water. But when you wake, it's always the same. The galley, the belly of the beast. You mop up the water pooling beneath the stove. You check the meat barrel, low. You check the bean sacks, thinner than yesterday. You sniff the butter, gone sour, still usable. On deck, someone shouts. Laughter follows, then boots, running, a game or a fight. Either way, it will end with someone bleeding. You boil water, just in case. A few herbs hang from a beam, dry, curled, parsley or what's left of it. Maybe rosemary. You crush some in your hand, rub it into the pan. A trick, a habit, something to remind the food what it used to be. Your apron is stiff, streaked with old grease, but it fits. It's yours. You take the knife from its hook, sharpen it, slowly. Long strokes across the stone. The rhythm helps, soothes the hum in your bones. You test the edge with your thumb. Just a touch, sharp enough. Outside the wind rises, the hull groans. The ship rocks harder now. You widen your stance. Dinner soon. You sort through the sacks again. Choose the least moldy onion, the firmest carrot, a few shriveled apples. The pork is mostly fat, but fat gives flavor. You chop, toss, stir. The pot bubbles, the scent spreads. Feet shuffle above. Voices call your name. Another day, another meal. You adjust the flame. And the kitchen, dark, damp, and always watching, exhales with you. She wasn't the largest ship on the sea, not the fastest either. But the Vigilant was solid, wide-bellied, low to the water, fast enough to catch the weak, strong enough to carry the spoils. Her hull was stained with salt and sun, her sails patched with care but not beauty. She bore no flag at first, not until she had her crew and her captain. He was called Elias Vane, not to be confused with the famous Charles Vane, though Elias claimed him as a cousin. No one ever proved the link. No one cared to try. Elias was lean, pale, wore fine boots, always polished, even in the rain. Carried a pistol too clean to have ever been fired, and a sword he loved, long, thin, and never dulled. He had a voice like gravel, not loud, but sharp, and eyes like wet iron, grey, cold, heavy. The men obeyed him, but they did not love him. Not the way they whispered about others, not the way they clapped backs or toasted names. They feared Elias, respected him perhaps, but love, that never took root. And at the edge of that respect, just out of sight, was the cook. His name was Morgan, older than most, broad shoulders, greasy hair pulled back with twine, fingers like sausages, and quiet, always quiet. Morgan cooked well when he had ingredients. He made salt pork palatable, biscuits soft again. He boiled seawater when needed, made tea from bark and cloth if the crew felt ill. He never raised his voice, never struck another man. But no one forgot the night he stared down a drunk quartermaster. Without blinking, they called him Galley Morgan, sometimes the boil master, never to his face. Morgan didn't smile much, but he listened, always listening, even when scrubbing the pot, even when the storm howled and the fire guttered and the captain screamed into the wind. Morgan heard things. He remembered things. And one day, something broke. It started, as it always does, with hunger. They'd been at sea for 3 weeks longer than planned. No prizes, no plunder, just grey skies and empty waters. The men grew restless. Not angry, not yet, but impatient, fidgeting, sharpening blades for no reason, muttering in corners, staring too long at the horizon or at each other. Morgan watched. He counted rations in silence, marked barrels with chalk, measured the beans by hand. Not enough, never enough. The bread was near useless, riddled with bugs, bloomed with mold. He scraped off the worst, toasted what he could, mixed crumbs into stews, thickening them, stretching what little they had. Still, bellies grumbled, voices rose. And the captain? Elias Vane paced, polished his boots, kept to his quarters, issued orders through the quartermaster, rarely speaking to the crew directly, but when he did, the words cut. No extra servings, no rest stops, no use of powder unless necessary, no song, no drink, no laughter. "This isn't a floating tavern," he'd bark. "We're not here to be fed and entertained." The men began to hate him, not openly, but deeply. And Morgan took note. One night, Morgan served the evening stew in silence, a thin gruel of beans and salt water thickened with biscuit dust and a few shreds of pork fat. It was hot, at least. The captain ate alone, always. Morgan delivered the bowl himself. He knocked once, waited, then entered. Captain Vane sat behind his desk. Maps rolled, logbook open. A candle burned low. His boots, as always, shone like wet stone. Morgan placed the bowl on the desk. Didn't speak. The captain didn't look up. "Too cold last time," he muttered. "Fix it." Morgan nodded, said nothing, turned to go. "Do you even know what hunger is, cook?" Vane called after him. Morgan paused. "Every man knows hunger," he said quietly. Vane snorted. "They think they do. But true hunger is when you eat your boots and dream of salt, when your bones sing, when you trade your soul for a potato." Morgan looked back once. "I'll keep that in mind, Captain." He left. That night, the men spoke in whispers. The captain's face was drawn, pale. His hands trembled slightly as he climbed to the quarterdeck. He blamed the sea, the cold, the wind. Morgan said nothing, but the men noticed, and Morgan listened. Days passed. The wind stayed cruel. The clouds hung low and heavy, like wet cloth over a coffin. Water leaked through the deck. The hammock smelled of rot. Boots squelched when they hit the planks in the morning. The stew stayed thin. The biscuits, thinner. One man passed out during watch. Another began talking to a fish he swore was his brother. Two fought over the last apple. It was soft, brown, and full of holes. Morgan served without a word. He was tired, but not shaky. Pale, but not sick. The men watched him. He seemed untouched by the hunger. Then came the fourth morning. The Vigilant drifted into fog. The crew was slow to rise, silent, cold. And the captain did not appear. No boots on the quarterdeck. No voice barking orders. Just quiet. Too quiet. Morgan was already at his fire. A fresh pot simmering low. Something thicker than usual. The men noticed, tilted their heads, lifted their noses. Morgan stirred, slowly. The quartermaster came down. His voice was hushed, his boots unsure. "The captain's taken ill," he said. Morgan just nodded. "He'll need broth." A pause. "He won't eat it," the quartermaster muttered. "Thinks it's cursed." Morgan glanced at him. "Maybe it is." No one laughed. That day, the captain stayed in his quarters. Morgan brought him broth again. Thick, steaming, rich, with something the others didn't get. No garlic, no herb, no flavor, but something. something that curled up from the steam and clung to the tongue. The captain drank half, said nothing. The next morning, worse. By evening, he couldn't rise. The ship was quiet again, too quiet. The men gathered on deck. No music, no dice, no noise. Just the slow realization that something had shifted. And Morgan kept cooking. The stew got thicker, the meat more generous, the smells more welcome. The captain did not reappear, and no one asked why. By the end of the week, the decision had already been made. Not out loud, not in words, but in glances, in the way no one asked about Elias Vane, in the way no one knocked on his door. Even the quartermaster, a man who once flinched at his own shadow, stopped delivering messages. The ship moved slower now, not just through water, but through time. The fog clung to its masts. The crew moved like ghosts. Only Morgan remained unchanged. He served thicker stew, more beans, even a hint of spice now and then. Where it came from, no one asked. Where it had been hidden, no one cared. The men ate quietly, thoughtfully. Some even smiled, and when they wiped their mouths, they didn't speak the captain's name. Below, in the captain's quarters, Vane lay in his bunk, his boots untouched, his maps rolled, his sword sheathed. He was thin, shivering, confused. He thought it was illness, sea air, damp, bad luck. Morgan never told him otherwise. Each day the cook brought food. Each day the captain ate less. One evening, Morgan stood by the door longer than usual, watching. The candle on the captain's desk burned low. Vane's breath rattled. His eyes stared past the ceiling, as if trying to see stars. Morgan whispered something, software too soft to hear. Then turned, closed the door, locked it. The next day, the captain's door remained shut. Morgan said nothing. The quartermaster gave orders, softly, gently. The men obeyed. No one raised a voice. No one asked questions. By nightfall, the boots were gone from the quarterdeck. The polished leather never shone again. And Morgan, he made dinner, served it warm, and in the steam rising from each bowl was peace. For a time. Without a captain, a ship drifts, but on the Vigilant, the drift was calm, deliberate. The quartermaster stepped forward, not as a tyrant, but a placeholder, a steward of peace. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He simply said, "We sail east." And the men nodded. No votes were taken, no ceremony held, only a silence, a long, quiet acceptance that something had ended and something else had begun. They sailed smoother than before. Strange, perhaps, but true. No fights broke out, no thefts, no lashes. Even the weather seemed to ease. Morgan kept his fire steady, kept his ladle clean, and for the first time in weeks, he whistled, softly. Not a tune anyone recognized, just a rhythm, a private one. The crew listened without listening, comforted somehow. They didn't ask what happened to Elias Vane, not when his door was finally opened and found empty. The desk still neat, the bed rumpled, the boots missing, the sword untouched. No note, no sign, just gone. Some said he jumped, slipped off the deck at night, delirious with fever. Others said the rats dragged him down, or the sea took him, jealous. No one looked too hard. And Morgan, he cleaned the captain's dishes, stored the bowl, swept the floor, burned the linens, then returned to the galley. He said nothing. But the meals grew better. A strange apple pie appeared one night, sweet, tart, and lumpy. The men devoured it in silence. One sailor clapped Morgan on the back. "What's in it?" he asked. Morgan smiled, just once. "Secrets," he said. No one pressed him further, because deep down, they all knew. And deep down they were grateful. The Vigilant drifted toward warmer seas. The men moved slower now, but with ease, like animals released from a tight cage. No more boots pounding the deck, no more icy stares from above. They laughed again, told stories, played dice in corners without glancing over their shoulders. And always, at the center of it all, the food. Morgan became more than a cook. He was a figure, not feared, not loved, but known. Like the mast, like the sea itself. No one asked what he believed, but they began to treat him with care. Some knocked before entering the galley. Others left small things near his bench, a coin, a sprig of mint, a bit of soap. Not offerings exactly, not payment, just respect. Superstition, maybe. But out here, superstition is as real as rope. They said Morgan could read bones in the stew, that he could smell a storm a day early, that his broth could mend a sprain, calm a fever, or soothe a guilty heart. He never confirmed any of it, just stirred and served, until one night when a squall broke without warning. Winds screamed, rain poured sideways, the sea rose fast and high. Men scrambled to tie sails, to steady barrels, to shout commands into the dark. And Morgan, he stood in the galley, hands on either side of the pot, feet planted wide. The fire sputtered, steam hissed. He held steady. When the storm passed, the ship groaned, bruised but intact. Not a man lost, not a mast broken. They said Morgan had tied a red cloth around the stove before the wind hit. A charm, perhaps. A prayer. They didn't ask where he got it. Only that it worked. After that, the whispers grew. Not fear, not quite reverence. Something in between. Weeks passed. The Vigilant saw its first prize at last. A slow merchant vessel, heavy with cloth, wine, and dried fruit. The chase was short, the fight shorter. The crew, hungry for reward, sprang into action. Swords drawn, pistols fired. A few screams, but no lasting wounds. They took the ship, stowed the goods, left the hull to the tide. The mood on board lifted. Voices rose in song. Even the sails seemed to flap with joy. And in the galley, Morgan prepared a feast. Dried figs in a stew, wine-soaked bread, something spiced and unfamiliar, pulled from a merchant's locked trunk. He didn't name the ingredient, just smiled faintly as the men devoured it. The quartermaster raised a cup. "To Morgan," he said. The men echoed it. "To Morgan." The cook blinked, set down his spoon, and nodded once. Nothing more. But something settled in that moment. Not a crown, not a command. Something quieter. A recognition. Morgan was not their leader, not by title, not by blade, but he held something else. Influence, trust. The kind that doesn't need orders. The kind that grows from fire and patience and bowls filled on cold nights. He was, in his way, a captain, and his knife, always sharp, always clean, had never drawn blood, except once, and no one dared speak of that, because some things you don't stir. One morning, the Vigilant approached land, a small island unnamed on any chart. Green hills, smoke in the distance, a settlement, perhaps. or a dream. The crew readied a landing party. Supplies were packed, sails trimmed, spirits rose again. Morgan stood at the rail, hands folded, watching. He didn't ask to go ashore. He never did. But he made a meal that night. Not stew, not gruel. Something different. He pulled from barrels rarely touched. Fish salted months ago, rinsed and fried. Small onions pickled and tart. Flatbread warmed over flame. Wine gently warmed and spiced. He served it quietly. The men sat in near silence, chewing slowly, savoring each bite. No one asked the reason. No one questioned the change. They knew. It was a closing. The wind was shifting. The voyage nearing an end. And with endings come remembrance. A man raised his cup, softly, reverently, to the captain. No one flinched, because they knew which one he meant. And Morgan, still as stone, lifted his own cup. To quiet seas, he said, and drank. Afterward, he cleaned each dish, sharpened his blade, banked the fire. He set a pot of water to steam, just enough to fog the air. Then he sat, alone in the glow of coals, listening to the ship breathe. Bootsteps passed above. Laughs drifted down. The creak of sails, the hush of tide, the sound of life continuing, of a secret kept, of justice or revenge or simply balance. Morgan never told anyone what he used. They never asked. Because what mattered wasn't what he stirred into the broth, it was what he took out of it. And on a ship full of pirates, that kind of power was the rarest treasure of all. It was discovered by accident. A team of underwater archaeologists combed the shallows off a forgotten reef, looking, as they often do, for ship timbers, cannon, rope still coiled beneath the sand. What they found instead was a spoon. Not silver, not gold, just pewter. Dull, soft, faintly green from the sea. It lay half buried, trapped in a crevice where the current didn't reach. Smooth, except for the initials. And something else. A line of scratches, carved deep. Letters maybe, symbols, or something more. They brushed it clean, bagged it, logged the find. They didn't know yet what they'd touched. But that spoon, that simple sunken spoon, would whisper back a tale of fire and steam, of curses scratched in the dark, and of a ship that burned, then vanished. The ship's name was never confirmed. The records showed possibilities: the Ash Wren, the Mersey's Teeth. One logbook found in a London archive hinted at a third, the Esme, but the ship herself never told. What was left of her lay scattered, ribs of wood, blackened and cracked, poking through the sand like bones. Charred canvas, metal nails warped by heat. No cannons, no figurehead. But in the middle of it all, that spoon. It was plain, nothing remarkable. But those who looked closer noticed two things. First, the initials. R. D. Scratched with something sharp. A nail, perhaps, or a pin. And beneath them, stranger marks. Not letters, not English. A spiral, then 3 slashes. A line that curled like smoke. The divers took photos. The museum catalogued it. But one researcher, tired, curious, and unusually quiet, read a line in an old sailor's diary that froze him. They say if you carve his name into pewter and let it touch the fire, you'll taste death before dawn. The entry was dated 1711. No context, no explanation, just that. And the spoon matched, The sea, as always, keeps most of its secrets, but a few slip through, wrapped in rope, tucked into the corner of an old crate, or scratched into the back of a wooden ladle. Galley tales, stories passed from cook to cook, not written, never admitted, but remembered. There were whispers once of a man named Red Davin. Not a captain, not a quartermaster, a cook, or something like one. Said to have served aboard the Esme, if that was indeed the ship's true name. Said to have been tall, quiet, and strange. Never took off his gloves. Always stirred with his left hand. He believed in fire, they said, not just for cooking, for binding, for cleansing. He carved symbols into his tools, stirred with rhythm, said words under his breath that no one understood, and most of all, he hated waste. The men mocked him at first, called him Salt Witch, Smoke Hand, Pewter Priest, until the ship's first storm. They said the fire in the galley never went out, even as the waves swallowed the gun deck. They said Red Davin fed it with more than wood. And afterward, the crew stopped laughing. The spoon, some believe, was his. Others said it belonged to a boy, a cabin lad who asked Davin to carve a charm into it to keep him safe. Davin obliged, but the sea, as always, does not barter fairly. Weeks later, the ship burned, mid-voyage, no enemy in sight, no cannon fire, just screams, smoke, and silence. Only one thing survived, the spoon. The wreck showed no signs of battle, no cannonballs in the hull, no splintered decks from broadsides, just fire damage, deep, precise, as if the blaze had come from within. Below deck, the galley was the most affected. Everything burned, iron warped, brick cracked. The camboose, that heavy cooking hearth, was fused to the floor. A ring of ash marked where the pot had once sat, perfectly round, nothing else. And at the center, a lump of melted pewter. Beside it, the spoon, untouched. Its bowl darkened, yes, its handle pitted, but whole, as if the fire had spared it on purpose. The archaeologists argued, some said it was coincidence, that the spoon had fallen into a gap, protected by timber. Others weren't sure. The spiral mark, examined under magnification, looked deliberate, careful, not hurried or desperate. It was too symmetrical, too clean. One folklore specialist noted its resemblance to a sailor's eye ward, a charm used to deflect envy or curses. But this one was different, older, possibly personal. When they tested the pewter, they found traces of something strange. A resin, tree sap most likely, mixed with salt, ash, and blood. Too old to be identified, too specific to ignore. And when the lab assistant cataloguing it fell ill, fever, confusion, trembling hands, the museum quietly moved the spoon to storage. It hasn't been displayed since. It rests now in a drawer, wrapped in linen, unlabeled, unspoken, but still warm. One diary survived the fire. It was found wedged between beams, sealed tight in oilcloth, pages damp but legible. It belonged to a cabin boy. No name listed, just a mark, 3 lines and a curl, matching the spoon. His handwriting was careful, not elegant, but steady. His notes brief. No emotion, just routine. Galley duty, fire hard to start, smoke burns eyes. Davin gave me the spoon. He said to carve the name but not say it. That line was underlined twice. The next entry, Captain said the meat was off. Davin didn't answer. We ate it anyway. Then storm came early. Davin tied red cloth to stove. It burned clean. And finally, he said the spoon would sink, but remember, that was the last line. No signature, no date. The pages after that were blank, scorched black at the edges. The boy was never identified. No records matched. No ship's manifest listed his name. But sailors talked of him long after. A lad who never aged, who sailed ghost ships, who watched from shorelines with smoke in his eyes, and always held a spoon. Not as a tool, as a promise. Among galley cooks, certain tools matter more than others. A pot can be replaced, a knife sharpened or reground, but a spoon, that's personal. It stirs, it serves, it touches everything. Some cooks keep their spoons tucked in belts. Others hang them above the stove. Some sleep with them beside their hammocks, not for comfort, but for safety. Because among the old hands, those who've cooked at sea for years, there's a belief. If your spoon breaks, you're next. Not next to die necessarily, but next for something. A storm, a fight, a sickness, and pewter. Pewter is soft, it bends, it bruises. It shouldn't last long at sea, which is why the spoon from the wreck matters. It wasn't just made of pewter, it survived. Salt, flame, rot. Nothing took it. And it carried a mark, not just a spiral, but a name. Though worn thin, certain letters remained. Rode D. Red Davin. Perhaps, but some think the initials stand for something else. Ration Divinum. A joke maybe. A whispered name for the unknowable source of meals that warm and calm and protect. The kitchen god. Cooks don't say it aloud, but when the wind rises and the deck rolls and the fire flickers, they stir the pot clockwise, once, twice, and tap the edge, softly, just in case someone or something is listening. The spoon sits now in a locked drawer, in a quiet room, in a building that smells of dust and forgotten salt. It no longer travels. The museum catalogued it under Galley Artifact Late 17th Century Unassigned Vessel, a small, cold title. No mention of the marks, no mention of Red Davin, or the fire, or the boy who vanished. But sometimes, on stormy nights, when a certain curator works late, they say a smell rises from the drawer, like ash and broth, and something warm. He says it's just memory, that metal holds heat longer than we think. But even he won't touch the spoon bare-handed anymore. He uses gloves, out of caution, perhaps, out of habit, or out of respect, because in that small curve of soft burned pewter is something larger, a life, a death, a ritual repeated too many times to be a coincidence. And in the silence between shipwreck and superstition, something survived. Not a treasure, not a map, just a spoon. Bent, scratched, stubborn, and still waiting to be stirred again. Not all meals on a pirate ship were equal. Far below, the crew chewed biscuit dust and salted pork, gruel and beans, rats if they were desperate, warmed over weak flame, slurped from dented bowls in the dark. But above, just a few feet, but a world away, things could be different. The captain's table wasn't a table at all. It was often just a barrel, or a chest, or a wide plank nailed to the support beams. Whatever was flat, clean and quiet. There were no tablecloths, no candelabras, but there was bread. Soft bread, if the flour was good, and the cook in favor. There was meat, dried or smoked or roasted. Sometimes fish, if caught fresh. Sometimes bird, caught during a port raid or bartered from another vessel. And always there was rum. Not always the cheap stuff. The captain's rum was darker, aged if possible, spiced if the quartermaster could find it. It came in a bottle kept wrapped in cloth to keep the label from rubbing off. And it was poured carefully. No one ever filled a cup to the top. That was wasteful. Just a finger's width. Enough to warm the mouth, loosen the tongue. At the captain's table, words mattered. They were measured like salt, poured like oil. Here, men spoke not of dice or daring, but of course and current, of sails spotted, of cargo holds, of names on maps and ships not yet seen. And when the meal was good, the mood stayed light. When the meat was bad, the room grew heavy, because the cook who fed the captain shaped the course of the ship, and the captain who ate too well while his men starved, well, that never ended quietly. Heat is not evenly shared aboard a ship. In the crew's mess, food might be warm if the fire held, if the sea didn't drown it, if the cook had time. But the captain's meal, always hot. The fire was coaxed just for him, even if the pot had to be scraped empty, even if the cook went hungry. The captain's portion came with steam. That heat meant more than comfort. It meant command. The man with the hottest meal was the man no one questioned. He sat above the smoke, above the bilge, above the press of men in sweat and grog. He ate slowly, deliberately, and others waited for him to finish before speaking. The food itself was never fancy. Pirate ships didn't carry chefs, but it was curated, selected, the best cuts, the freshest biscuit, the last apple, if any were left. Often, the food came with parchment beside it, a list of captured goods, a letter from the quartermaster, a map stained with brine and thumbprints, and so dinner became ritual, not just to feed the captain, but to prepare him, to set the mind for weighty decisions, for conflict, for alliances yet to be forged. Some captains took this seriously. They ate alone. They read in silence, chewing slowly, drinking once. Others invited guests, but only those they trusted. The captain's table wasn't for company. It was for strategy. And the food, it wasn't nourishment. It was performance. When the captain invited someone to eat at his table, it wasn't a kindness. It was a signal, a test. To sit on a barrel across from him, that meant something. It meant he saw you, measured you, possibly needed you. The invited sat upright, always. Shoulders stiff, voice careful. You didn't ask for salt. You didn't complain about the food. You listened. And when you spoke, it was only because the captain looked up and waited for it. Guests varied. A new gunner who'd shown courage, a quartermaster with concerns, a navigator with a strange chart. Even enemies sometimes, bound at the wrists, but given meat and rum, as a gesture, or a trap. The food was always plain, but served well, sliced, not torn, a bit of garnish, if Morgan or his kind were in the galley, soft bread soaked in gravy, salted beef sliced thin, boiled egg if the hens had laid, a sliver of lemon, hard-earned from the last port. The meal itself was brief, but afterward, the talking began. That was the true course. Whispers about shares, mutiny, a change in heading, a letter from a contact in Barbados, a merchant ship due in 6 days, lightly guarded. The food wasn't the point. It was the setting. And once it ended and the guest was dismissed, the real question began. Would they be invited back? Or would the next meal be their last? There was always a knife. Not a weapon, not officially. Just a dining knife, short, heavy, often bone-handled, sometimes silver if taken from a prize ship. It lay beside the plate, never used for eating, not really. The food was soft enough to tear. The spoon did most of the work, but the knife was always there. And the rule was simple. Don't touch it unless the captain does. If he picked it up, you watched his hands. If he laid it down gently, the conversation continued. If he pressed it to the wood, point down, a warning. And if he passed it across the table, that meant a choice. Take it, and you've accepted something, a duty, a secret, sometimes a death. Leave it, and you're marked. Quietly, the crew will know, the cook will hear. Most turned it down gently, eyes low. The smart ones never came to supper again, but some, a few, picked it up, and those were the ones who either rose or vanished. The knife made no sound on the wood, just a tap, a pause, a shift in breath. And in that silence, the air thickened, the candle trembled, and the food, however well cooked, always cooled a little faster. The softest food aboard the ship was never handed out freely. Bread, real bread, wasn't a given. It was earned. Preserved flour was precious. Yeast was a trick. Fire, a luxury. The crew got biscuit, hard, dry, infested if left too long. But the captain got bread. Simple, white, dense, sometimes torn, sometimes sliced. It was served warm when possible, folded in cloth to keep the heat, always placed first on the barrel before anything else. A quiet signal. The meal had begun. But bread, on a pirate ship, meant more than food. It meant trust. You didn't break bread with someone unless you were ready to deal with them, or betray them. The old cooks knew this. They watched from the shadows. If two men shared a crust, that was a pact. If the bread sat untouched between them, that was tension. And if the captain tore a piece and passed it with his hand, not a knife, not a spoon, it meant the talk was sacred. No crew talk, no coin talk, just men. Few received that gesture, and fewer survived it unchanged. Because the bread on the captain's table wasn't just nourishment, it was a border. Cross it, and you were no longer just part of the crew. You were part of the plan. Every pirate knew the feeling. The air thickens, the sails hang still, the gulls vanish, a storm is coming. And when the captain knows it, truly knows it, he calls for a meal, not because he's hungry, but because the next hours might offer nothing. The galley stirs early, the fire burns longer. The cook works fast but with care. He knows what this is. This isn't dinner, it's a ritual. Meat is boiled to tenderness, a bit of rum added to soften the salt. A few beans, a turn of spice, if there's time. Sometimes a plum is passed up from the hold, saved for just this. The captain eats slowly, quietly, no guests, only maps, and a steady drink. He doesn't speak, he listens, to the wind, to the creak of the ship, to the quiet beyond the bulkhead. Every bite is measured. He never finishes the plate. He leaves something behind, not because he's full, but because it's a rule. You never clean the plate before a battle. Leave a little for the sea, for luck, for the ones who won't eat again. The crew watches silent. They know the signs. And when the captain rises from that meal, no one asks what's coming. They just ready the sails and pray the cook keeps the fire going. no matter how the storm rages. After the fight, after the chase, after the fire and smoke and shouting, there was always silence. The kind that felt heavy. Men would stagger, sit, check their hands, count heads, count spoons, pour drinks without words. And the captain, he would eat, not to celebrate, not to boast, but to ground himself. The table, or the barrel, or the crate, or whatever passed for it that day, would be cleared. A clean cloth laid, a single bowl set down, and the cook, tired, singed, bruised, would bring something simple: bread, meat, hot water steeped with citrus peel, a knife, and leave. The captain sat alone. Sometimes he'd light a lantern, sometimes not. Sometimes he'd speak to no one, sometimes to a ghost, but always he would eat in silence, because victory at sea is never clean. And the captain's table knew that. It remembered the rings from the rum bottle, the burn mark from a stray candle, the score marks from a blade. Every meal left something behind. A crumb, a question, a decision. And when the bowl was empty and the spoon set down, the captain would look at the dark outside his cabin and wonder not what to do next, but who would be at his table tomorrow. At first glance, the captain's table might seem like a myth. You picture oak boards, silver goblets, flickering lanterns. But aboard a pirate ship, reality is simpler, harsher, and more telling. The captain's table was often just a flat surface, a barrel turned sideways, a crate dragged into a quiet corner, a plank set across two stools. But it held power, not in its height, not in its shape, but in the space it created. Space to speak, space to eat in silence, space to decide the fate of everyone else still chewing salt meat below deck. Up here, the food was better, warmer, touched first by the ladle, seasoned if the cook dared, protected from the rats, the cold, the reach of dirty fingers. Here, the stew had flavor, the bread, softness, the drink, a darker hue, but none of that was guaranteed. It all depended on the captain and what he demanded from the cook. Some captains ate plain, beans, bread, rum, never more. Others had tastes. They expected dried fruits rehydrated in port wine, salted duck peppered with spice from Morocco, fish roasted in parchment, things no pirate ship should carry, yet sometimes did, because food was leverage. The meal wasn't about luxury, it was about control. The better the food, the more the captain could afford to give less in other areas. Fewer coins, less rum, more silence. And yet, that food also invited risk. Too rich, and the crew grew suspicious. Too regular, and they grew resentful. It was a balance, an art, one the cook managed with as much care as any map or compass. To be invited to eat with the captain was rare. You didn't ask for it. You didn't hint. You waited. And if your name was called, you climbed the ladder carefully, hands clean, boots wiped, eyes lowered. At the captain's table, everything meant something. Where you sat, when you were offered bread, how full your cup was poured. Small things told large truths. A guest with a half-filled bowl watched. A guest with a cup refilled twice trusted. And if no bread was offered, well, that was a message. Sometimes the captain ate in silence while his guest squirmed in the flickering light. Other times, he spoke casually, of tides, of tobacco, of home. But always there was a question tucked somewhere in the words, a hook, and the guest's answer would determine if they ate here again, or not at all. There was always a knife beside the plate, not for cutting, it wasn't needed. Bread was torn, meat pulled apart with fingers. The knife was ceremonial, symbolic. Some captains never touched it. Others played with it as they spoke, tapping it, turning it slowly, testing its weight. Some carved small notches into the wood as they thought. Each mark was a decision made. Some carved symbols, stars, circles, a single line with a curl. The cook never asked about these. He just sanded them down later, or left them if they felt like warnings. One cook said the knife was the real captain, because every word around it bent slightly in its direction. Every meal at the captain's table ended the same. A pause, a sip of rum, a glance at the bowl, and then one bite left. Not eaten, always one. It wasn't superstition, not officially, but the idea was old. Never empty your plate at sea. Leave a morsel. For the dead, for the sea, for tomorrow. Some captains forgot this, ate everything. They rarely lasted long. The ones who remembered, who wiped their mouth and set their spoon down gently, they were the ones the crew followed. Because restraint on a pirate ship is rarer than gold and much more valuable. On rare nights, there was a feast, not planned, not promised. It happened when a merchant vessel yielded more than expected, or when a port cook sold extra spice, or when a storm missed and the crew believed it was because of luck, not skill. Then the table changed. Bread was cut into thick slices. Butter, if they had it, spread smooth. Cheese appeared, sharp, firm, stolen. There might be fruit, not much. Slices, citrus or dried plums soaked back to life. The captain ate first, slowly. Nod of thanks to the cook, if he was feeling generous. Then, sometimes, a second table was set. A crate pulled up. Another plate filled. A guest invited. That night, the candle burned low. The room was warm. The map spread wide. Not for strategy, not for conquest, just for dreaming. Tracing paths not yet taken, coasts not yet seen. And for a moment, brief but real, the ship felt like a home, not a weapon. Before a storm, the meal was different, heavier, hotter. A stew thick enough to sit in the belly. Bread crusted at the edge for grip. A boiled egg, soft, salted, quick to eat with fingers. The cook served early. The captain ate in full gear, coat on, boots laced, blade beside him. The food wasn't chewed so much as stored, energy for the hours ahead. He didn't speak. He ate, sipped, read the map again. Listened to the sail strain overhead. The knife stayed untouched. No room for choices tonight. Only weather, only wind, only waiting. After battle, after fire, after running a ship down until its sails burned and the sea cooled, the captain would eat, alone, no guest, no cook nearby, just him and the table. The meal was plain, bread, water, a slice of meat if any remained. The candle burned low. Sometimes he didn't eat at all, just sat staring at the dish, watching steam curl into nothing. The cook left it there, warm. He never asked what was said in that room, or if the captain cried, or if he prayed. He just washed the spoon when it returned, and sharpened the knife, because tomorrow there would be another meal. And the barrel, old, scratched, splintering, would wait, ready to carry secrets again. So now you know. A pirate ship's most powerful place wasn't always the wheel, or the crow's nest, or even the captain's quarters. Sometimes it was the kitchen, a swaying, smoky room of salt pork and quiet judgment, a place where spoons mattered more than swords, where stew could keep the peace or tip it over, where one man over a pot held the ship's rhythm in his hands. History doesn't often name these men. They didn't write logs, didn't lead charges, didn't die in duels. But they fed the ones who did. They boiled the beans before battle, poured the rum that sealed a pact, watched from the shadows when the knife came down. And if they vanished, no monument marked them. Just a pewter spoon, a scorched plank, the memory of a meal served hot before the sea rose again.